I was just wondering, will we get the slide with the video on it?
I'll give you the password.
Okay. Yeah, let me get in here and.
Do you need the Wi-Fi?
I have the password. Can you keep it? What?
Which one is it, Amy? Which?
It's use 2.4, 3, or 5.
Okay.
And then it's C, capital C, O, 3, capital B, U-L-L, capital D, O.
Capital D-O-D.
Yeah.
See if that works.
I get home at 6 o'clock.
So, will you have two?
Okay, so
You're setting a good example.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Have a chance to download the stuff.
Not yet.
Amy?
Let me know.
That's on my list to do. I think Thursday.
I shaved. I didn't.
What do you say?
I did not.
No feedback. You put sunglasses on. And the game's okay? The game's okay? Oh, yeah, well.
All right, you are connected now to Wi-Fi, so my only, I'm not certain where it's at in here, and I've never run one from this, so let's try, which slide do I go? I am guessing that this. There you go. So let's see how this works. I've never done it where we're playing. Play out of here. I think.
True story.
Let's try again here.
You should be fine just sitting there right by the speaker, Chris. You're used to it.
I think we'll bypass the pledge. I won't do it. We have no minutes to approve. We have citizen comment. Any citizen would like to make a comment on anything that's on the agenda? No? Okay. Let's move into township business, but before that, I want to do a round of introductions so we sort of know who we represent and what we're doing. So, Bud, why don't you start back there? Introduce yourself.
I'm Bud Graham, but don't I look like it?
He's a supervisor.
I'm a supervisor.
Paul Rittenhouse, resident, former.
Chris?
Chris Gamble, Planning Commission member.
I'm Dennis Hammeister. I'm a supervisor.
Frank Harden, supervisor.
Bruce Lawrence, supervisor.
Bill Wallace, planning commission.
Steve Greer, ARM Group, Vice President of Business Development.
Carl Jackson, Glide Path Ventures, and investor in solar projects.
Tim Mills, I'm our program manager at Home Group for renewable energy distributed generation.
And the guy that's working on the computer is?
Mark Bogle, principal planner with CRPA.
Keep working on the computer a lot. so.
Yep.
Amy?
I'm Amy Farkas, I'm the township manager.
And volume.
And these two wonderful guys.
Yeah.
Keep us straight. We're doing all kinds of things for this meeting today, so you'll be able to see it multiple times, so. Let's move into the presentation, and not sure who's going to kick it off, but
Well, I'll do the intro, and then I'm going to turn it over to Carl and Tim.
I was thinking about dimming the lights because you.
Sure.
The PowerPoint, that
Yes,
looks great. Let me see what, I don't know what these.
is this okay?
That's good.
Turn that one first one off.
Yeah, front one, there you go. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Feel like it's dark outside?
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you all for hosting us today. We appreciate the opportunity to come and to talk a little bit about our engineering companies, our development companies, and the renewable energy industry. We want to treat this as sort of like a educational outreach. We'll accept any questions, we'd like to see it be as interactive as possible. And if we want to interrupt any of the slides, feel free. We're not real regimented in how we go about these things. A little bit about ARM Group. We're founded 22 years ago. We're made up now of other ARM companies, Enertech, Geoscience, GSET, which is our geotechnical engineering and testing company, Camco, and AEC. And the only reason I'm going to talk a little bit about those or introduce you to those in our practice areas is that these are all services and engineering disciplines that we use in the development and construction and commissioning and closure of renewable energy projects. Okay. Enertech, they're our electrical and mechanical engineering arm. They have probably about 25 mechanical and electrical engineers based out in Johnstown, PA. They also have a shop, and I say a shop, like a panel shop, in Mechanicsburg. There's one in Johnstown as well. So not only can they do the design and engineering on controls and automation, but they build their own panels there as well. GSET, Geotechnical Lab, based up in Jessup, PA, outside of Scranton. Primarily involved in the construction arena. They've been a real good asset to ours, as we now have a geotechnical lab that we can use in our projects. Camco and AEC, we just purchased probably 2 years ago, I believe, and they really provide the field services and the equipment for a lot of our electrical and mechanical projects. ARM, or ARM, we go back and forth as saying, is it an ARM group or ARM group? ARM group was, like I said, founded 22 years ago, primarily to handle the needs of the solid waste and environmental industries. From that, though, we grew. Now we're about 215 people with about 10 offices. The corporate office is in Hershey. It's always been in Hershey. State College office has been up here for probably about 12 years now. We have 8 offices in Pennsylvania, probably a total of 10. We really surround Pennsylvania. We canvass the state fairly well, which helps us out in a lot of the disciplines in the engineering disciplines that we work in. I'll let Carl talk a little bit about glide path, and then we could get back a little bit to the engineering
So
services.
my company is Glide Path, but yes,
You grab the mic,
right,
Okay.
just pull it off.
sir. I don't want to break anything. So my company is Glide Path Ventures. A little bit about me. I graduated from Penn State as the other two gentlemen up here. My formidable years were spent in this town and fell in love with it. So, and also my extended family are here as well. So it's a love affair for my team. We've got a little bit over 60 projects in the state of Pennsylvania that are in various stages of development. Our primary focus is projects in both agricultural and in reclaimed coal surface areas. And we found a project in working with a local landowner, a parcel local in Harris Township, and we're really excited about it. Our team always partners with local engineering teams. I've actually known Steve for since I was 18 years old, and we've had a great relationship for many years. Over the last 3 years, I've gotten to work with Tim and the ARM team, and we've done a significant amount of work over the last 3 years to the tune of just under $1 billion of assets that we are collectively invested in. So we take projects from site origination all the way to the beginning of construction, at which point that we work with various institutional banks and other companies that provide the long-term financing for these projects. Myself and my partner Jeff Underwood have developed a significant amount of projects. We've worked with every major company that does solar development in the United States or outside of the United States. And then our third partner, Charlie Celio, comes from more of an investment banking background, and he is our CFO. We work with the best vendor partners like ARM and others in local markets to make sure that we are engaging with the local community as best that we can. Everywhere that we go, we're focused on partnering with the community. We're in no way trying to be a disruption or a disruptive act within a community. But yeah, that's a little bit about us. Our average footprint is anywhere from 15 acres up to roughly.
I did touch a little bit on the service lines and the practice areas that we have, and one thing that Carl did bring up was some of the project areas that we're focusing on, and that just fits so nicely with some of the things that we do in our mining and quarrying, and also in our environmental groups. So these are our basic practice areas. As I said, we were founded, to address the waste management and the environmental industries, and we developed some skills, a lot of good skills over those years, after the start there, and just naturally got into geotechnical and then geophysical and air quality and all of these practice areas. My personal focus is that I'm as business development vice president, is to make sure that we grow these practice areas. And one of the things that, no matter if it's an oil and gas project, a solid waste project, or now a renewable energy project, we're finding, and this is, you guys know this, that if you can pull off a turnkey project, it just runs more smoothly. It's very efficient. It saves a lot of costs, and you have one-stop shopping, and it's easy to be accountable along the way. So a lot of these practice areas we put into place on even the renewable projects. Okay. Along with that, we work in every region, every day with the DEP. There's 6 regions. And so we, you know, part of our success is due to our reputation and our relationship with the Department of Environmental Protection. The same with our projects in Maryland and Virginia as well. Okay. Any questions on anything so far? I'm going to turn it over to Tim now. Tim, as he introduced himself, he's a program manager for our renewable practice area. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the services that we can provide across the country.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
As this geographic map indicates, these are all the regions that we currently have states and licenses to do engineering work, and we broke it down by the different disciplines. So on the one, it shows electrical engineering, the testing, commissioning, automation controls. We're very flexible all over the whole country. We also do the civil engineering, surveying, natural resources, structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, do a lot of construction phase, just support on projects, and then we're also doing battery storage projects, which are often coupled with solar systems. As you know, COVID's impacted millions of people across the country. It's really decimated the economy and caused a big downturn in the overall economy. We believe that solar storage, renewable energy could be a tremendous opportunity to bring growth back, sustainable growth to local communities. Solar projects and renewable projects in general have long-term contracts that last for typically 20 to possibly 35 years. Those contracts are locked in, and a lot of investment institutions, banks, pension funds invest in those projects, and they're not impacted by things like the commodity market or the stock market. So they're safe harbors for investment dollars, and they bring a lot of money and just overall investment to local communities, engaging local contractors like ARM on the engineering side, to people building fences, doing the landscaping, doing the site work. So we feel really good about where renewables are going in Pennsylvania, and in particular, I think it could really benefit the small family farms throughout Pennsylvania, which are really hurting from tariffs. Just for years, they've been hurting just because of low prices, and it can bring steady, constant revenue to these families, help it keep in the family long term. In Pennsylvania, there's 2 current bills that are out, one focusing on community solar, one focusing on the alternative energy portfolio standard. For a long time, Pennsylvania had very little renewable energy development, but surrounding Pennsylvania, they had much more aggressive goals. So House Bill 1195 is focused on the alternative energy portfolio standard. Right now, we have a goal of only 0.5% solar in the state. We're looking to increase that by at least 5% or 5.5%. And then the overall renewable energy standard, there's actually 2 different versions, one taking it to 18% by 2025, and then the other taking it to 30% by 2030. In comparison, if you look at Virginia, they have a very aggressive goal of 100% renewable energy by 2050. Maryland by 2035 has a 50% renewable energy goal. New York has a 100% renewable energy goal. New Jersey is very aggressive. So we'd like to see that increase. We think it could spur a lot of development in the state, bring billions of dollars, create thousands of jobs. But it's very difficult just because of cheap, low wholesale electricity prices. But renewables have gotten so competitive. We think that the technology is there. Incentives are decreasing, and they're competitive with all the traditional fuel sources at this point.
Tim?
Sure.
So besides
Yep.
setting goals,
Yep.
what do those bills do in terms of either bringing resources to the table or regulatory changes?
Sure. So what the bills currently do is it will be a small add-on to people's utility bills that you'll pay, so your electric bill each month. It supports a thing called an SREC, which is a solar renewable energy credit. And so every kilowatt hour or megawatt hour that your system produces, you'll actually get money either as the owner of the system, let's say it's a solar system, which pays itself off, but it is adding a small little fee onto your bill. It's, I think, less than a penny or half a penny. It also just reduces the amount of pollution in our state. These are clean energy sources, so that has healthcare impacts, just environmental impacts. Overall, it also creates high-paying technical jobs as well. The renewable energy industry is filled with very skilled project managers, engineers, scientists, you name it. If we don't hit that goal, Pennsylvania is shutting down a lot of its nuclear and coal plants right now. And if those increases in the renewable portfolio standard aren't put in place, natural gas could take up 70% of our electricity mix by 2035, which would be a huge percentage of our overall electricity mix. So we're looking to diversify that mix overall in the state. Does that help answer your question?
A bit.
Bruce, can you do me a favor? The Zoom people couldn't hear your questions, so next time you can go over that microphone over there.
Okay.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
Why don't we just bring the mic over here?
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate if.
No, yeah, that's probably easier.
It's got a long board, so we.
Anyways, my main question was with those two bills, setting goals is fine, but you need to bring resources to the table. A half a penny, is that a half penny per kilowatt hour? Or?
I would have to look up the exact
Okay.
number, but it's minuscule to just your monthly power bill. Community solar is a little bit different right now. If you want to build, let's say, a large-scale solar system out on a farm field to just get the economies of scale, the cheaper pricing, you can't just subscribe to that solar system like a Comcast TV contract. You would have to either build it on your house, but let's say you have trees, your roof has just got a lot of different angles, it's not suitable, or you just don't have the capital to be able to invest in that solar system. This gives people different energy options available that are flexible. So let's say you move to State College, you want to get solar energy and you want to get it locally. You could subscribe to a local solar system that's in the same utility territory, get your power from that system, you don't have to put up any capital. If you leave and move, it's like ending your TV subscription or internet subscription. So it just opens up customer choice to a lot of people in the state. So I think that's a tremendous value as well.
Okay.
Yep.
And that price point would be lower than what you're paying currently. So
Yep.
your price point usually is about 15 to 20% lower in community solar.
Mm-hmm.
On average, somewhere in that range, that's the goal, is to try to get to that point. And for urban centers to suburban centers to more rural centers where they're not, where there's just not the available capital to facilitate a system, because these projects can get relatively expensive. This is the fastest and easiest way for people to take advantage and really control their energy costs. Especially why it makes a lot of sense is in a market like Pennsylvania where you have third-party aggregators who are constantly probably reaching out to you, like Talent Energy or Constellation Energy, asking to price just the energy side, not the transmission and distribution side of your bill. So sometimes you'll get a bill from, let's say, Penelec and that third-party entity. In this particular case with community solar, you would just get one bill, and it would attack the entire bill. So that's how it's able to push down the price.
And just to elaborate on another benefit specifically for landowners, or let's say coal miners or farmers, farmers in particular, just with how low corn, soybean prices are, you can get multiple times the value of the price. Let's say you were growing soybean on your farm for $200 an acre a year, which is, I think, right in the range. It's $150, $200. You can get up to $1,000, maybe $1,500 an acre each year. Somebody else will pay your property taxes on that leased area. They are responsible to come in, decommission that system at the end of the life. They're responsible for maintaining, doing all the operation and maintenance on that site. For a lot of older farmers or just small family farms, let's say their kids aren't getting into farming. It just gives them the opportunity to lock that land in for 20 to 35 years, where somebody else is giving steady payments to them. You're letting the soil rest on those sites. You can integrate a lot of different solar ecology components, so pollinators, native vegetation, maybe sheep grazing, which generates a lot of just positive benefits, which I'll actually elaborate on a little bit later. But I think that's really important to show that we're saving a lot of these family farms and then giving them the option to go back and continue farming at the end of that lease period. So there's a lot of small tangible benefits that I think we can elaborate on that we get into a little bit more in a couple slides.
Yeah, and also, as we talked earlier, when you're looking at reclaiming old mine sites, it's almost like a dual purpose there. You serve as a remediator of the brownfield of the coal site, and plus you're putting the solar system on land that has just been abandoned in most cases. And you know, on the environmental side, that's providing a lot of advantages and assets to just, you know, cleaning up the old abandoned mines. We work closely with the abandoned mine program in Virginia, Maryland, and in particular in Pennsylvania, where they have prioritized their mines, have just been left alone for decades. And with the help of people like Carl and his group, we're really focusing on a lot of those areas.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you can just paraphrase it
Yeah.
for the audience.
Sure.
So we have very few abandoned mines in Harris Township, but we do have a lot of cloudiness. We're one of the third cloudiest spots in North America.
Chris, can you use the microphone?
You can paraphrase it. We're good. And so, how efficient is solar in in a cloudy place like we are?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just say the question. So the question was, how, you know, in Center County, there's, you know, you have the valley, right, and there's a fair amount of cloudy days. So how efficient is solar? So, and how is it able to produce energy in that time? You know,
Profit.
right, a profit, right. So I'll get into this slide in a second, but to answer your question more succinctly is that the cost curve when I started in solar over 12 years ago was roughly about, let's call it about $7 a watt, right, installed per panel. And the cost curve today is right around, even with tariffs on those panels, it's right around 42 cents, 44 cents. So, and during that time span between 2009 till now, the actual efficiency of those modules has gone up, you know, over 400%, somewhere in that range. You know, this year we started out in the 100s per module, and now we're in the high or mid 450s range of efficiency. And then, you know, sometime in 2021, 2022, there will be a 500 watt module. So the efficiency has gone up significantly, and the cost has come down exponentially. So that's just the cost component of it. And then because that efficiency has gone up exponentially, you now have the ability to capture more light in lower sun radiation areas. So by virtue of the costs coming down so much and the performance getting that much better, we're at a point now where we can go into some markets like Steve talked about in Massachusetts, which is really low light, you know, New York, where it's heavy snow, if you're talking about, you know, near the Syracuse and Schenectady area, which I developed projects there. But when I first started, it was all North Carolina, California, and then people migrated to Texas because those are the highest radiation sun hours in the country. And over the last 5 years, we've seen a heavy migration into markets that are what we would have called just a little while ago, less than a decade ago, severely challenged.
Carl, just to add on to that, there's also advancements in the racking technology as well. you've probably seen a lot of rooftop systems or just fixed tilt systems that don't move. But over the past probably even 2 years, I would say, it seems like everything has totally shifted to these single axis tracker systems that start out in the east. And then by the end of the day, they're setting in the west. They're getting probably, it depends on the region, but 15 to 25% bump in production. And then there's also a new technology, bifacial panel that's collecting solar radiance on both sides. And so you're getting the light coming down, and then the albedo effect off grass, snow, if it's sand, a white surface, whatever it is, you're getting an extra bump of 15%, I would say, in Pennsylvania. And that combined bump is really helping. And these panels are also designed to produce energy in lower light conditions. They get a wide spectrum of the different irradiance that's coming from the sun, and they're much more effective. I think that used to be a bigger problem when the solar industry was just getting started, but they've really focused on some of these markets in colder climates. The tracking panels can also shed snow as well, which is a huge benefit, especially up by like Erie or up in New York, where they might get heavy snow.
Is this my
Yes.
my slide?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so why we focused on Pennsylvania? It's a little bit to your question, a little bit, in that PJM, which is referenced here in one of the bullet points, is the regulatory body that covers roughly 13 states. The acronym stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland. That's what it originally was, those 3 states that came together. And PJM regulates the utilities in those states. Now it's all the way as west as far as Indiana / Michigan, and as far south as the northern tip of North Carolina and a little bit of Tennessee. So it's a pretty, and then as far east as New Jersey. So it's kind of a wide swath of coverage. We focus on Pennsylvania because a lot of these other states have things like prevailing wage, like very, very, very high union wage costs. It's not that we're not willing to pay for high wage, but some of the restrictions that like a state like New Jersey puts on projects make it borderline impossible to really navigate and be as nimble as we need to be to get these projects into the ground. Can really cause delays. States like Maryland and Virginia have state level permits just to begin the process of permitting a project. That can add a yearly, somewhere around a year to 2 years to the development cycle. And just to take a step back and go a little bit more macro, these projects are subject to or have access to a federal tax credit. And that federal tax credit is declining as we speak. So in 2019 and prior was 30%. The value of the system was available in the form of a federal tax credit. This year it's 26%, next year it's 22%. So you can see where this is going. So we focused on Pennsylvania because it's a big enough state that has significant swaths of land, both land that's already been either reclaimed or needing to be repurposed, as well as agricultural land, industrial land. There's a whole swath of that. We chose Pennsylvania because, for me and the other 2 gentlemen, it's our home state, and we wanted to invest in the state. We looked at a bunch of different states when we launched the company, and focused here because we found that from both a land perspective as well as from an interconnection perspective, the ability to actually interconnect these systems, there was a relatively open network of opportunity because there really wasn't much activity like some other states. In fact, in PJM, Pennsylvania, of the states that actually have what Tim was talking about, an alternative energy portfolio standard or a renewable portfolio standard in most states. Pennsylvania is the least active. So we felt that there was an opportunity to actually, have some projects get in the ground in an expeditious way. We currently have projects in several townships that neighbor here, as well as a few on the west side of the state that are approaching construction. Two fairly large projects that ARM is quarterbacking for us will go into construction in August/September. So that's a little bit about why Pennsylvania we feel is a great opportunity. And that's irregardless of what happens with legislation, to the gentleman's question before. But as we've seen, there's more interest at both the Republican and Democratic sides of the House and Senate, state Senate, that are supportive of pushing something forward. One of those two bills we feel will get light of day. But the good thing about us, because we're a very nimble, smaller company in the sense of headcount, is that we don't really need the incentives to push forward. We've built these projects irregardless of state incentives. So that's what makes us a little bit interesting. And then, as far as to get back to what Tim and I were a part of a fact-finding group that produced a report that Pennsylvania, as it says here, is close to 400 megawatts today of installed capacity, comparative to states like Massachusetts or New Jersey or Maryland are in the several gigawatts, if not more. Virginia just passed legislation, the one that you didn't talk about, Tim, for 17 gigawatts of opportunity. So, it's a significant fold difference than where we are today. And what we found is that not only will there be construction jobs, but what matters to the local townships is available tax revenue. So these projects will kick off real benefit to each one of these townships. For some, it'll be extremely meaningful. For others, it still will have an impact. It won't be, like a new Amazon, distribution center coming in. But these projects are pretty significant in their available economic benefit.
You said the Commonwealth could support 11 gigawatts. What's that based upon? Available land area or demand?
Yeah, it's not even close to the Pennsylvania demand. That's just I think that represents, that's 11% of the total.
11 gigawatts is based
No,
off the 8% of the alternative energy
Right.
portfolio standard. So that takes into account the total electricity supply demand in the state. So 11 gigawatts would translate to 8% of the alternative energy portfolio standard.
Yeah, and as far as the land piece, we're not even coming close to the surface area that has any sort of impact on open land. So we're seeing that, like I said, I kind of touched on some of this, and so did Tim. But the big highlight is that there are local jobs that are long lasting out of this. The operations and maintenance of each one of these projects. The good part is that unlike a peaker plant or a natural gas plant or a coal plant or nuclear plant, you're not going to have potential deaths and things of that nature on a regular basis that you're focused on because of just the headcount and what's being done on the premises. It's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere between 2 to 10 long-term jobs that last the entire time. But as far as the construction, the local construction can spawn off per project around between 50 to 100 jobs per project, if not more. As we touched base on the tax revenue, each one of these projects will be responsible for. Additionally, for the landowners, what we find is for landowners that are either doing a lease or they want us to buy their land, it's an opportunity for the lease counterparties to monetize their land, to actually make the claim that this land will be able to be reconstituted to what it was prior to. No other fuel really can say that. So we what goes into the ground is just a steel post, that's it, as well as some wiring. You pull that out and you're able to regrade that parcel and repurpose it. And if you want to build residence at the end of the lease, if you want to further develop that parcel or just convert it back to a farm, you can. Yes, sir.
Question. One of the things, I'm sitting there reading number 3, it says solar farms can offer rent 3 to 4 times traditional cost, dollars per acre per year. Well, if I'm a farmer, and that also, if I'm doing that with my acreage, I don't have the expenses. So I can make a lot of money sitting at home, and that sounds great on paper. What happens if every farmer does that? What do we eat?
Well,
No,
it's a fair point, and the question was, if every farmer, the return to the farmer is great, but what if every farmer in a community did solar? What would the town or the township produce for food, right? And how does that impact the supply chain? There is a limited amount of opportunity per township, and you're not going to see us, irregardless of us, other developers just pile on to each available parcel. That's why you have the governing body, PJM, as well as the local utility, whether it's Penelect or West Penn Power, that assigns a cost for each one of those projects to interconnect, and at some point, it really gets cost prohibitive.
Is that something that, as we've got our planning commission here and our supervisor, is that something that going forward that we should put in our zoning? That we're only gonna allow so much acreage to be done up in solar? Or is that something that we should be putting in today for the future? Or is that something we're just gonna rely on the groups you talked about
Yeah.
to do their thing and farmers to be judicial about which ones do it, which ones don't? So I guess that would be my question. Is that something that as a group we should be looking at now?
In my opinion, but I'm a solar developer, is that it's going to you're not going to be able to go through, because we have the most amount of projects in this state, so we have the most amount of data points from how many per line that you can actually, per transmission line that you actually can interconnect to. It's between 1 to 3 projects. And so why I say that is you have in Harris, in Potter, in Ferguson, in several other, in Walker, you only have, you basically have one big, distribution network. Some other towns don't. They have multiple lines that are coming out of various substations, but here, it kind of works as like a recursive loop, and you have a bunch of 46 kV lines, but they're all kind of feeding one another. So you're only going to get a handful of projects here. That said, I would say that the township's got to do what the township has to do to protect themselves. I just don't see in this town or many others that there's going to be a significant enough where you're going to feel like you're going to need to curb that. But that's just my 2 cents.
Carl, I was just going to elaborate on one thing. Me and Steve were actually on a call today with one of our contractor partners that will do what we call regenerative farming as part of the solar site. So you'll have the solar site, but you can do pollinators on that site, can co-locate bee colonies. That will benefit surrounding farm sites just by pollinating those sites. But there's also groups out there that are grazing sheep across many different solar sites. They're selling that meat as sustainable sourced meat, regenerative just agriculture, and they're selling it to grocery stores like Lowe's, Kroger's, Whole Foods. They're selling the wool to clothing companies. They're selling the leather to companies like Timberland. So they're constantly trying to improve these sites, make them more dual purpose, engage the stakeholders, take into consideration some of your concerns like, are we going to lose all our farms? Where's the food going to come from? I think there's approaches we can take collaboratively with the stakeholders to make sure we're building in those things that benefit the local community. But like Carl was saying, the biggest driving factor is really the capacity on those lines, and you're only going to be able to get so many. I forget the statistic off the top of my head, but one of the lady Sharon Pillar that was a big player in the PA Solar Future program, I think it's like less than 1% of the total land across Pennsylvania we would need to hit that 11% capacity. I'm trying to remember the percentage, but it's extremely small. There's no way they would take up every farm, and we'd be in a situation where there'd be a food insecurity issue.
Yeah, I would just lastly say that, you know, I see a lot of land like that's the majority of my day is reviewing land. You know, we find a parcel, invariably, and depending on how rural it is, we'd love to do all of them. You know, usually because of the cost component associated with PJM and the utility, we're trying to be as close to that line as possible. So there's only maybe 1 or 2 parcels that really make sense. Sometimes you can get a little bit further in distance, but most times not. So there's not likely at all that we would have, you know, 30 different parcel owners in a small vicinity. Natural gas is much different than that. You know, their footprint can be as, you know, significantly long, but they're going to aggregate, you know, a swath of what, a couple thousand acres, 2,000, 10,000 acres, and you know, and they can drill horizontally. For us, it's really that surface area and proximity to the line. So this is a little bit what I was telling you before. So, you know, to the question that you were asking, sir, about the cost curve, you know, LCOE is levelized cost of energy. You can see these two graphs are depicting both wind on the left and solar PV on the right. And it kind of shows you the trajectory from 2009 in wind and solar till now. And as you can see, I don't want to point too much, but you can see where we started in 2009 in both technologies. You know, wind was around 16 cents, 16.9 cents in 2009, and you know, so that's what the customer would have paid. And for solar, it was even worse, 39 cents. And, you know, so there are heavy subsidies that were happening at that time that actually made it cost positive for the client. You had much higher solar renewable energy credits. You actually had at that time what was called a cash grant instead of the tax credit. So you would get 30% of the project cost in cash from the Treasury. And then you see that, you know, between 2009 to 2015, you know, we're down to 7 cents in solar and in 7.7 cents in wind at the top, and at the bottom, this is the range. You know, you're anywhere from 32 cents. There's going to be 3.2 cents in 2015, and solar was at 5.8 cents. Yes, sir.
7 cents of what?
KWH. So what you're getting delivered to the customer, whether that's residential, or excuse me, not residential, but
7 cents
Per kilowatt hour.
per kilowatt hour.
That is what, how relate 7, I don't know what that means.
Oh, what it means is that if you're a residential or commercial or even industrial, well, not so much industrial, but residential commercial user, you would be getting a price per kWh. So it may be around here 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cents, something along those lines. This is just telling you the trajectory of the cost of just the energy component of that bill. Your bill is broken up into energy and then transmission and distribution. In, I don't know, what was it, 2008? The state went deregulated, is that correct? And what that meant is that the utilities decided we don't want to be in the business of generating power anymore. What we'd rather be in is in the business of just being the infrastructure. So they gave up the generation, and third-party aggregators came in, like I was saying, Talon, Constellation, Direct Energy, some of these other companies came in, and they got into the business of delivering you cheaper energy only. That's it. And the utility still is charging a fairly high rate for their transmission and distribution, the actual cost to deliver that power to you.
So this is 7 cents per watt to produce it, then that starts to be delivered.
Correct. Yes. And so you can see today we're at, that's all right. So you can see today we're at a low of 3.6 cents, which is right around, and then go to the next slide, Steve. So you can see, we're hovering between 3.2 cents for solar, and wind is at 2.8 cents. Your average cost in PJM for energy, just the energy piece, is somewhere between 3.2 to somewhere around 3.8. So if you went to
Duplicate that price without taxpayers' money, without subsidies.
pardon me?
Could you duplicate that price without subsidies?
We're getting there quickly. Yes. I mean, if you look at it, if we went, I would say this, I would challenge anybody that there are significant subsidies on coal and natural gas. If we all went subsidy free, I think we would be, there's no question that we would be at the lowest end of that. We'd be much lower than wind, or excuse me, much lower than coal and lower than gas. Nuclear is really tough to beat just because of the way that they generate. But the problem is, now go to the next slide. So this is showing you, to your question, sir, the reason why there are no new coal, natural gas, or excuse me, no new coal or nuclear plants being built, because all of the cost that you incur when you build one of these systems are very front loaded, and you need the life cycle of one of those plants is somewhere in around 45, 50 years. And solar, you can build in a relatively short period of time, somewhere in around 1 to 2, maybe 3 years, and still hit the price points that we were just talking about. So, that's why we're seeing a tsunami of coal plants. There aren't really any incentives to just shut them down. We're seeing a tsunami of them, and utilities converting a lot of their, like Dominion in Virginia, Duke in North Carolina, they're converting their plants over to renewables, or at least building out a wider mix. We will always have natural gas. We'll always have, in my mind, we'll always have some form of nuclear or I don't know that we're going to have coal, but there's going to be a wide mix. Solar probably doesn't solve, solar, wind, battery storage doesn't solve it all.
We have a question from one of the planning commission members on Zoom, and he said, what are the other environmental impacts, water, land, impact of transmission lines, and construction? Can we maybe turn a light on here? A little dark.
Yeah, I can take that question. So,
To rephrase it,
yeah, sure. So the question I'm just rephrasing is, what are some of the other impacts that solar would have from an environmental health standpoint on the land? It's honestly very, very low. There's no health impacts that I'm aware of with solar. You get that with coal, nuclear, from just the emissions from in our groundwater, the pollution, the methane, the carbon, all that stuff. With solar, there's no health costs involved with that. Maybe if you want to consider the initial manufacturing, but the clean energy that it's producing pays that off over time. On the land, there's very little impact actually on the land, because what you're doing is you're going onto a site, let's say that's a farm site that you're putting a certain level of herbicides or pesticides, manure, you're nutrient loading these sites. Or if you come in with a solar system, you're reducing that nutrient loading on the site and taking that off. There isn't metal leaching, there's no chemicals or contaminants running off these solar systems. They are decommissioned and completely removed off the site once the project has hit the end of its lease term. Or that just isn't the case with coal sites where they strip a site, they got to reclaim it, you get the acid mine runoff damage. With natural gas sites, you're getting leaking of methane, abandoned wells, things like that. So impacts to the electrical grid, honestly, the local utilities it's mainly the local utilities are passing on upgrade costs to these solar developers and other developers. So we're actually upgrading transmission, distribution, substations. We can actually defer upgrades as well by including battery storage as well. So that's doing different grid services, resiliency services, and ancillary services like frequency regulation, load shifting, things like that. So.
Yeah, and I would just add that the utility in some markets, not so much, this is another reason why we chose Pennsylvania, but in Massachusetts, some of the utilities looked at that as a piggy bank opportunity where they had planned infrastructure upgrades, and they said, oh, you know, the solar developers or whatever developers are coming in, we're going to charge you whatever those infrastructure upgrades were for the entire network. And in some cases, the solar project can sustain that. In some cases, they can't. That impact is not felt by the actual end user. It's mostly felt by the actual project cost.
Just to elaborate as well, I actually took a class at Penn State for my master's program, and we studied the life cycle of all the equipment from solar, so the solar panels, the different minerals and materials that they're putting in the solar panels. The payback period on that is extremely quick. It's usually around a year or two, and they're getting free 100% clean energy after that. You can't really make that case with any other energy source that we're getting our electricity from in the state.
Does the current West Penn grid have the capacity to absorb solar?
Yes.
Yes.
And I've been told it does not.
No, it does.
And apparently it's true around the first energy system from Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, into here, which is one of the reasons why states aren't getting into it, because the grid isn't capable of holding it. Is that true?
No. First Energy is the largest utility in the state of Pennsylvania, right, by a square mile.
Well, but Ohio, Indiana, Illinois.
Right. Yeah. And the reason why it's good that you have PJM, unlike some other markets, there are non-regulated utility markets all over this country. Several, but focusing on Pennsylvania, First Energy has to comply with the review of each one of these projects. We pay a significant amount of money for them to do what's called a feasibility study. That's the initial study of the project. The possible electrification of that project at that point in the grid. Then they do a system impact study. That's a more detailed study. So the first study, they give you a cost associated with that. It's very high level. The second study is more detailed, and they've given you a more granular look on all the costs that are going to be associated, how long it's going to take, what the actual timeline is going to be. And the last study is a facility study. Now these three studies, depending on the size of the system, can take 18 months. In some cases you get lucky, and we've been lucky, where those studies get condensed down to roughly about 9 months. But that's not reality for the majority. So usually it takes between 18 months to, for the larger projects, it takes upwards of 36 months. And throughout that period of time, First Energy is engaged in review of exactly what can be done on their lines. And they are very quick in the feasibility study to tell you, what we think maybe may cost, a couple $100,000 to interconnect. They'll come back with a $5 million interconnection because post 9/11, FERC doesn't allow you to look at the actual grid in the way that you used to pre that. So we don't really have an ability to look at the grid like some other markets and really do some stress tests to see what's available. So we don't know what we're going to get until feasibility comes out. And why I bring that up is First Energy and the local utility is along for the ride the entire time. And they're opining the entire time, telling us, here's what we're seeing. And sometimes we don't even know if we have a viable project until that that facility study is done, because they have other projects that need to make a decision if they're going to move forward, to a whole litany of different things. But yeah, First Energy and whether it's West Penn or Penelect or some of the other Med-Ed, they're involved throughout. And the last thing I will say is, at the beginning of each project, after we put it in for a review, we have a kickoff call with their engineers, the local utilities engineers, meaning PJM's engineers, First Energy engineers, and the local utilities engineers, so in this case, West Penn. And they tell us, what does it look like? What's the point of interconnection? Are there any other projects on that line? What's the timeline that they anticipate? There's a whole what we call a kickoff call, but that starts the process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What's the life cycle of a gas-fired power plant, and why don't you get payback? Isn't it economical after 5 years?
It's just the infrastructure cost to deliver it, and the price point for energy is relatively low at this point. So now,
The longer it's in operation.
totally, but that front end cost is pretty significant comparatively. We're talking about it costs us somewhere around $1 to 90 cents right now per watt delivered. So 1 million watts or a 1 megawatt plant costs us just about $1 million. For the same amount for a natural gas plant can be 5, 6, 10x that, depending on what kind of turbine they're using and the infrastructure build out that it requires.
But I think what Bruce is asking, you have your startup, but over the period, the whole period, the useful life of whether it's a solar panel or a gas plant or a nuclear plant, what's the payback on all those? In other words, is that cost spread out far enough to give you cheap enough electricity?
I would say yes, but I would also say that if you're starting at a lower cost point at the same time, and these systems, the solar systems now have a confirmed life cycle of between 35 to 45 years from BDO, the actuary, and so if you're looking at that same 45 years and it costs you $5 per watt to put it in the ground, or in some cases $7, $8, but Steve and Tim would have better numbers than me on the natural gas side, and it costs you 90 cents to $1 to actually put that solar plant in, and you're generating the same energy and the same price point. Invariably, the return, both the ability to hit lower cost energy allows for that bigger margin up front, versus if it takes you 15 years before you start getting into a cash flow positive situation. But Steve or
Steve, I don't mean to cut you off. One of the biggest things I think that we're missing here is a natural gas plant, the fuel isn't free. On a solar plant, it's free coming from the sun. I think that's one of the biggest factors. There's also a ton of just big, heavy equipment, moving parts in a natural gas plant that require a lot of cost in operation and maintenance. Solar's operation and maintenance is extremely minuscule. You can remotely monitor these systems. You maybe go out once a month, mow the grass, make sure the fence, maybe do minor upgrades, but compared to a natural gas plant or pipeline infrastructure, it's very small. The long-term payback period on a natural gas plant or a nuclear plant or coal plant, you got to factor in, let's say, coal ash sites, nuclear disposal, which is just never ending. With natural gas, it's capping wells, fixing and maintaining pipeline infrastructure. That's all extremely expensive. It has environmental impacts that they have to pay for as well, where solar just doesn't have that. It's really just the big upfront expense, and the operation and maintenance is very small. And then the decommissioning, you're actually putting money into an escrow account right when the project is getting built. So let's say if a company went out of business that built that system, it's not going to be abandoned on that site. That escrow money will be a security that that system can be decommissioned, the site can be reclaimed the way it is. So you're just not going to see abandoned solar systems like you could see, let's say, with a abandoned coal mining site. So.
Could you talk briefly about decommissioning and what happens to a field of panels when they're removed and no longer useful? I know that might be conjecture because we don't have the newer ones yet retired.
Yeah, you know, we have the Department of Energy.
Could you rephrase the question, please?
Yes, sir. So the question is, what does the decommissioning plan look like, and how's that work with the technology as you know, of today? The Department of Energy have, when they were starting to review fixed tilt systems, that was the original system, just stays static, as Tim was talking about. Also, you know, single axis tracker systems. Dating back till the late 1980s, they have systems that are still active today, that are roughly about 85, a little under 85% efficient. I bring that up from the standpoint that I don't know that, you know, depending on the landowner, our typical lease arrangement is around 40 years. But let's assume that at the end of that 40 years, the process is, because these are driven posts, so you just get a machine and drive posts, you know, in rows, usually between 14 to 18 feet row spacing per row. And then, you know, you have your various wires, you know, your inverters that are put on the parcel, usually 1 to 2, maybe 3, depending on the system size, which is located in various spots on the parcel. But the removal of each one of those is the same scenario as putting them in the ground. You're just pulling that erector set module and the actual post out of the ground, at which point you're looking to regrade that land back to whatever the structure was at that time. If there were rolling hills, you're not going to get back to necessarily rolling hills, but you're going to regrade that land to be usable. But Tim, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, there's actually companies that are just forming right now for these older systems that are recycling the solar panels. After about 13 to 15 years, the solar inverters will be taken out. It's a similar process how to, let's say, we would recycle computers and other things. But they are thinking about recycling that material now. The metal, steel, aluminum can obviously be recycled, reused. But like Carl was saying, it's really just removing the post. Honestly, I'm not sure that grading to a certain extent would be really a huge issue. You're really just pulling the conduit out of the ground. But you might do some limited grading. Most of the site would just stay as a field. So it wouldn't just be like a big dirt site. You would leave as much of the site untouched as you could.
And as technology has gotten better, what we're seeing right now is, like I was telling you at the beginning, that the efficiency of these modules were 100 watts plus to now, in the 400s and pretty soon be in the 500s. We're just seeing not the post being pulled out, but the modules being replaced, just to get more production out of each module.
We have a question from the planning commission over on Zoom. George wants to know, am I correct that a project of 10 MW needs to provide for, say, 2,000 homes? How much land is needed for enough panels to build out that project?
I usually say about 5 to 6 acres per megawatt. It depends if it's a fixed tilt system or a tracker system, but we just need to give enough inter-row spacing so they don't self-shade each other and reduce production.
Yeah, and I would just elaborate that we're working in the way that we approach every one of these projects is we work directly with the Planning Commission, the township engineers, through groups like ARM, to create a final land development plan, which has all the setbacks, has all of the, inclusions that we want in each one of those plans. So with that being said, that 10 megawatt question, depending on the size of the parcel, we may have setbacks, we may have things that won't actually equate to just 5 acres. It may be more like 6, 7, 8 acres because we have those setbacks and we got to account for it to get the right system size.
Yep.
I would think that you would, just looking at your applications here, I think you could push back on utilizing forested land and foregoing the environmental services of the forest, not regrowing it, regenerating it.
So we are seeing some forested sites be developed for solar. They're typically already timbered every 10 to 15 years already. We're seeing a lot of the reclaimed coal mining sites that they timber. You mean down south? Like not in Pennsylvania?
Forested sites that are timbered every 15 years or so?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so it really depends, but we're dealing with one parcel in Clearfield right now, and I don't know how often they timber, but it's been, according to them, at least twice over the last, 12 or 13 years, something along those lines. They are this particular site, they were getting ready to sell. This gave them because the timber wasn't really keeping up with the cost of holding the parcel.
We do like to prefer sites that are brownfield sites, reclaimed sites. They're just a lot more difficult, more expensive to get developed and build. But those are the sites that I think are great land use examples of where we can put solar. I know personally we're doing a big search of those sites in particular throughout Pennsylvania, a couple other sites, other states. But you're going to see solar built on all different types of applications, parking lots, rooftops, farmland, reclaimed coal mining, landfills, forested sites here and there. It just depends on the application. But that's one thing that we try to focus on as part of the whole solar ecology just mantra, is trying to integrate solar to build a sustainable market, getting the stakeholders support locally. So we have to work with the townships, county, to develop these land development plans and get that support, go through the zoning process to make sure it's a use that local community wants to see. I always like this quote that's kind of going along with what I was just saying. The purpose of science is not to conquer the land, but to understand the mechanisms of ecosystems and to fit man into the resources he has available on the planet on which he has evolved. Just elaborating more on these solar ecology applications, I think a lot of people still view solar as, hey, you're taking up a lot of our good land, you're just putting solar out there, it used to be used for food or another application, we could have maybe built buildings here. But the solar industry is very creative, it's constantly changing. That's one of the great reasons why I joined the industry. But one of the big drivers, like we're discussing, is land use, clearing trees, operation and maintenance. So integrating things like sheep grazing onto the site, including pollinator components, all have tangible benefits. Stormwater management benefits are one of the biggest ones. We can actually do calculations as an engineer on a site that, let's say, is an active agricultural site. What are those nutrient reductions? Are there Chesapeake Bay watershed credits associated with that? What is the increased stormwater infiltration on the site, because you're putting more long-term species that maybe have deeper roots. You're increasing microbial health on these sites. So lots of great benefits, I think, overall. And then it just looks nicer, I think, if you have pretty flowers and pollinators and native vegetation instead of just grass. But there are a number of regulatory issues that do come up with solar that we have to work through and consider. So whenever we just look at a site for the first time, if we're looking at a site with Carl, we do a critical issues study, an entitlement matrix. And so we'll actually look to see where all the streams, wetlands, floodplains, and we will try to avoid those altogether. We rarely ever impact wetlands. We just try to stay out of it because it makes the whole permitting process longer, and we don't want to impact that local environment. We analyze for sensitive species. They're an endangered species. We look for bog turtles, Indiana bats. We look for red current. We look for all those species on these sites. We also look for cultural resources, if it's historic buildings or Native American burial ground, whatever it is. And then we also look at agricultural sites. So prime farmland is a big one that you see come up in like York and Lancaster a good bit, or preserved farmland. So we obviously try to avoid developing on those sites, and they do have restrictions as well. For land use permits and approvals, we try to build in as much of the stormwater management, erosion sedimentation control. These sites aren't impervious at all. The rain just runs off the panels, goes underneath, and is absorbed into the grass and other vegetation. That's one misconception that always comes up in township meetings, is they want to treat it as a parking lot. Where's the water actually going? These sites do a great job of absorbing and infiltrating that water on the sites. We do glint glare analysis to determine if it's close to a school or close to a road. But these solar panels are meant to absorb the radiance and the light. It's not reflecting. There are concentrated or parabolic mirror solar panels that you see out in the desert that are reflecting up to a tower. That's a totally different technology. You're going to get the same reflective nature off of, let's say, a car windshield or a lake. It just depends on where that sun angle is at that time of the year. We also incorporate landscaping screening, so abutting neighbors. We try to be sensitive about just aesthetics on the site overall. Oh, yep, zoning. So with zoning, we try to see first if there's a permitted use, or if we have to go through an exception or a zoning text amendment. A lot of townships, counties just don't have anything that specifies solar as permitted use. So we'll actually work with townships, with counties to develop that ordinance, taking into account all those stakeholder considerations so they develop something that everybody's happy with. We actually did that in a number of counties, in Greene Township and Beaver County. We did in York County and West Manchester Township, working on one in Berks County right now. So we're actively trying to work as closely with those stakeholders as we can.
Question.
Sure.
Does a solar array negate a farm that's in a conservation program? We have not a lot of farms in Harris Township. Potter has a lot, Ferguson has a lot. What kind of regulatory issue are you dealing with when you take a farm that's in a conservation program that's been bought for development rights? Put a solar array on that, or do you start all over again?
So, we 99% of this, so the question was, if there's a conservation easement or a parcel in conservation, a farm that's in a conservation program, would we put solar on that, and how does that work?
Now, can you?
Yeah, can you? And I would say 99% of the time we won't go in that direction at all, because there's usually a significant amount of restrictions, as well as there's just it's not what the conservation program was meant for at all. So usually, and I've been on the front end of this, it's really tough to try to figure that out in any way. So just like Tim was saying about wetlands and certain areas that we'll just avoid, we always do a title search to make sure that we're not in a conservation easement or there isn't a restrictive program, because we really don't want to step on that landmine at all.
You can develop solar on clean and green properties. To my knowledge, you can't do it on preserved farmland. CREP land is kind of a gray area right now, but we know they're looking into possibly doing that because that's typically lower productivity land that farmers take out of production. They get paid by the government to do that, which solar could take that place, but that's complicated. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Clean and green is a tax program.
Right.
It doesn't touch the conservation issue.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we take a parcel out of clean and green, we, as Tim was highlighting before, we'll cover the cost of that, that back payment. So I think it's 7 years of back taxes. We cover the cost of that, and then any incremental increase in tax associated with the solar project going forward.
You ever dealt with ag security areas? Harris Township has 3,200 acres in ag conservation program, Mark? Ever deal with that?
No, I'm not familiar. You guys?
I haven't either.
No.
I think almost all the townships in Center County have ag security areas.
No, we haven't, we've got a multitude of projects in the area. We haven't dealt with it. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't come up, but it hasn't been a part of our any of our projects. That said, we continue to develop projects. I'm sure, we'll come across it, but we have not.
You have to be an ACA before you get into the clean and green. It's a 1-2 step kind of program.
A lot of the times, the landowners, the farmers, don't want to use that land for development.
Yeah.
We're working with a large dairy farmer just outside of here, and we looked at their sites, and they want us to develop on their lowest productivity cornfield, and that's what we focused on. So a lot of the times, they take their marginal land for development. Rarely do we get the best land possible. It's usually the hilly sites or the low productivity sites, which is fine. Like that's great. That's essentially what CREP does. So shifting back to the solar ecology plan, which is what we try to build into our civil design, land development design. It's all these different components. So we'll meet with the local stakeholders, the landowner, maybe abutting neighbors, township, county officials. We'll come up with goals for that plan. What are you trying to accomplish on this site? Are you looking to integrate native vegetation, maybe pollinators? Do you want to do sheep grazing? What kind of fencing? Or are you concerned about neighbors and want to put screening up? We try to put an O&M plan in place, because if we're going to say, hey, we're going to put native pollinator species out there, there needs to be a solid operation and maintenance plan to make sure, hey, in a year or two from now, you don't have invasive species and weeds. You need someone to actually maintain that. So we work with local groups, national groups, to build that into our plans. We found we get a lot of support at the township county level, and then just with the landowners and other stakeholders. We also just look at any targeted species, trying to avoid those things, other habitats of concern. And then we also try to build in just considerations, let's say a retirement community. We just finished a 1 megawatt solar system at a retirement facility. We incorporated a walking path, we got educational signs, there's wildlife observation opportunities. We're doing educational opportunities. I know Carl does a lot of work with Penn State, teaching students. I've gone up and actually spoken to students. You can bring students onto these sites. You can do research programs on different sites. We're actively pursuing that on one of our sites right now, almost a $100,000 research program that would fund graduate and undergraduate students to study solar, energy storage, land use. And then, yeah. Yep, already touched on those. So I think I touched on a bunch of these things, but there's just other things you can build into these sites. So co-locating bee colonies. We've done that on a site in Frederick, Maryland. You can do bird bat boxes. We try to avoid habitat fragmentation on sites, salvaging native species, just minimize overall habitat impact overall. Yeah, just wrapping up our overall presentation, we just wanted to show two last projects real quick that we think are great uses of land use. And this is the largest landfill project in North America. We did this project with EDF Renewables, which is a large, worldwide organization that does a lot of renewables. It's 18 megawatts AC. It's producing over 20,000 megawatt hours of clean energy each year. It's providing up to $5 million in tax revenue for the city of Annapolis, who is the off-taker of this power, and utilizing a capped reclaimed landfill is probably one of the best uses you can do for solar. It is more expensive, but it works on a site we can get that scale, and we're very close to the major load centers where electricity rates are a little bit higher. We're also working on reclaimed coal mining sites. We can still drive piles, steel posts through the ground on these sites. We're actively working to integrate native and pollinator seed mixes on this site, and then we're looking into sheep grazing where it's appropriate. So this is a great site that was filled with invasive species previously. They were not really doing anything with this site. They can't develop warehouses or residential buildings on this site. So redeveloping it as a solar system where we can have this multi-use benefit is huge. And that's also bringing in a tremendous amount of just tax revenue to the local township. And then last here is actually a video of our retirement facility project we just finished. This was for Country Meadows in Frederick, Maryland. So this is a nice time lapse of the project. So this was right after it was seeded, so you're still seeing a lot of hay on the site. So that land right there is a slow piece of land that they could not use for any other development. The facility's right up on that hill. We have a walking path surrounding that facility. It does have a co-located bee colonies, and they're actively integrating the native and pollinator seed mixes across the site right now. So just wanted to share that nice video. Appreciate all your time. An opportunity to come speak to you guys, and you guys.
Involved in either of the UAJ project or the county prison project?
No, no.
No.
The UAJ project's an impressive,
Mm.
impressive project.
We have done work on the project right off Orchard Road. We did some of the electrical work
Yeah,
on
at
that
the hospital.
at the hospital.
I have a question, I guess, or a comment. You know, everything looks great. The numbers look great, everything looks fine, but have you really taken a good hard look at what energy needs are gonna be needed in the future? You're gonna be talking about a time when everybody's gonna have 2 electric cars sitting in their driveway, charging them all night long. You're gonna have kids on their video games, because they're already nocturnal, they're doing it at night. The last time I looked, the sun doesn't shine at night, so you're talking about a lot of storage facilities. As those storage, that worries me more than the solar, the storage facilities, because you know, now you got batteries, you got chemicals, you got things in those things that are bad actors. You know, mankind has gone headlong into projects where they think everything's great, and 20 years later they go, oops. You know, we've done that our whole history. Just look back. We've done it everywhere. So my concern is, as demand goes, and you're going to need more of these, are we painting ourselves into a corner we're not going to be able to get out of at some point? Because if you have to start telling people, oh, gee, you can only charge 1 car at night, or well, you can only be on your computer so long a night, or you can't be on your devices. We start telling people that, and they're going to be I don't care what it is or how environmentally friendly, they're not going to be happy with that, and they're going to want power. I personally, my personal preference is nuclear. And you know, everybody says, oh my goodness. Well, I can honestly tell you they're the most efficient power source out there. You can't make it, hey, it can regulate its power by its demand. The higher the demand, the power will go up. The lower the demand, the power goes down, and nobody has to sit there and do anything to it. It'll self-generate itself. It doesn't put out the waste everybody, the public does. I operated them for 8 years. I can honestly tell you they don't put out a lot. So my question is, we're going to need something like that, a super source of power to fill in the blanks, I guess is the best way to put it. And I just, this looks great, and I just don't want everybody to go tunnel vision through this. And that's my concern, that everybody's going to get tunnel vision and just run down this passive energy source for everybody to rely on. And we're just going to be at some day, and like I said, I'm at the end of my life, so from my standpoint, okay, that's what you want to do, but at some point that's going to hit, and that's my concern. Have you guys looked at the increased electric use that's coming? It's not here yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, we have, but I would say, to your point, I'm super bullish on solar. Because of the ability to adopt it, the timeline, all the stuff that we already talked about. But to your point, you know, as I said, I think I weaved that in, but if I didn't, I'll say it again here more succinctly, is that, you know, it's going to be a group effort. It's not going to be solar. It's not just going to be wind. It's not going to be nuclear. It's not just going to be natural gas. You know, we're going to continue to innovate. There is a huge demand coming, to your point. But, you know, currently, what's solar? Like less than?
It's like maybe
Under
3% of the total electricity on the grid.
It's under 5%. And, you know, I think the reality is some of the metrics that are out to 2030/2050 have that adoption, if everything goes well, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30%, which is a massive increase in that adoption.
That's countrywide.
Yeah, that's countrywide. And in my humble opinion, you know, you're still going to need other things to supplement. And that's even with the most efficient batteries that can deploy at nighttime. So, you know, there's something called microgrids, basically a closed loop system, depending on what you're using as the fuel source, but weaving in natural gas or some other source along with solar, along with storage. And it tends to be, if you can figure out where to place it, it tends to be the most efficient use of all of those technologies. So to your point, I mean, I don't see us going headlong the way you're highlighting. You know, what we've seen in every market that has adopted solar, invariably, that adoption hits a point, and then, the public starts looking for other things that they want to put in conjunction with that. The only thing is that irregardless of whether it's solar, coal plants are shutting down at a rate that has nothing to do with solar. And so that gap, to your demand question, that gap has to be filled by something. And we're not seeing new nuclear being built. Natural gas is being built, but as natural gas goes offshore, the cost of natural gas it appears it will continue to go up. So something's going to fill that void. And I think that's what we're talking about today.
And Frank, we also do an awful lot of natural gas work. And the way that's going is the country is going to be heavily dependent on natural gas. And we know you can't do that. And as Carl said, it's going to be a team effort. It's going to take a lot of energy to stay on top of it, no pun intended. It's the direction it's going in. And one thing we didn't talk about, because we are heavily involved in natural gas, is the transmission and the safety and the security of the downstream industry. You have upstream, midstream, and downstream. And we also have a 3-year contract with the PUC. So we know what the regulations are. And when we get together, and Carl's a great developer to work with because he's an environmental steward as well. So that's part of the thing we always look at is, does it make sense, and what are we leaving behind? And it's not just lip service. We take that all into account.
Yeah, I think solar is going to focus on peak, so in the middle of the day. It's going to chop that peak demand off, reduce demand charges. But we're going to see a mix of offshore wind, onshore wind. We're going to see nuclear still there for a while. My brother-in-law works at 3 Mile Island, so I'm very familiar with the nuclear industry. Coal is going to disappear, I think, for the most part across the country because it's just being crushed by natural gas, honestly, just on a price standpoint, and just it's a much cleaner energy source, natural gas. So we live in PJM. It's the largest electricity grid in the world. Don't quote me on this, but it's probably the most efficiently managed as well, and one of the most reliable in the world. They're a just grid operator, an independent system operator that manages all these different load sources. So trying to charge your car, trying to charge your phone, it's not going to be just coming from one energy source. When you send electrons onto the grid, I always view it as just like a big pool of water. You're mixing electrons with coal, nuclear, natural gas. So it's always going to be a diversified mix. I think just from a national security standpoint, we're always going to have to keep it somewhat diversified. But I think overall the direction our energy sources are going are lower carbon, lower just economic footprint. And I think that's a good thing. And I think I understand your concerns with batteries in particular, just with lithium and cobalt and some of those materials. There's a tremendous amount of battery technologies coming out that are much more clean, don't include cobalt and some of those conflict materials. But one of the benefits with storage is it provides instantaneous power and very flexible power, and the duration of these storage systems are just getting longer and longer, and they're actually going to start replacing some of these smaller coal plants, some of the small peaker plants, the natural gas plants. But I think that's on the industry to just constantly keep on improving, look at that supply chain, trying to clean that up if there are supply chain issues just from sourcing the materials. I think that's something that we can take on as an industry, and I'm very encouraged, I think, for the future. I think our grid operator is going to do a good job at just making sure we got a reliable system overall.
And I think one of the underlying discussions that you brought up, Frank, as well a couple of times was the ordinance, and if this meeting wasn't about the ordinance and amending the ordinance, but if there's a time that you need some support or want some assistance in framing that, you know, we'd offer our time to help you with that as well.
Yeah, I just have one quick question for the board and for the planning commission. As you guys are thinking about this, you know, we've been really great. Amy and Todd have been tremendous in helping us through just engaging and giving us information. As you're thinking about solar, I know that you're currently reviewing it as an accessory use. Any resistance for it to be a primary use?
I think when we looked at it as a primary use for a maintenance facility, I think the numbers were pretty high, if I remember correctly. That we were only gonna get, what, 10% of our energy?
But that would be,
Talking about a primary use ordinance, which,
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about.
yeah.
yeah, the planning
No, we
commission
haven't
is,
looked at that.
yeah, is
We
working
ruled
on.
out nuclear off our facility.
What's that?
We ruled out nuclear off our facility.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, the planning commission is looking at those regulations. They just finished the draft accessory regulations, this month. And then I know Todd and Mark are watching the webinar tomorrow, on solar. And they've all been watching on Zoom, and they've all been, chiming in, and I think we're gonna have another discussion about this probably at our August meeting. So they are moving forward with that. I think we wanted to work on renewables in general, but they're gonna split it up and do the solar piece first, because that's more well-known than the wind, and it's a little less of a commodity around.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
What happens if you have two municipalities that have two separate ordinances, but you're using the same piece of land, which you're going to do obviously in one project? You have a piece of land in two separate townships. What happens with the two separate ordinances if they don't match up?
You have to go meet with those two different townships.
We're
Yeah.
developing ordinances, Pollock Township is developing ordinances. Are they going to match?
This happened to us down in Lebanon County between Anvil, Cleona, what is it? The town of Anvil and what is it? It's on the edge of Palmyra. So we were actually going through like 3 different local townships. One, it was supportive. The 2 other, it wasn't as support. It just makes it a little more difficult. That's why they try to focus on just building the system in one township if they can.
You do an intergovernmental agreement.
Well, it seems to me you've done your system engineering, okay. And I think what we're confusing with, you're not an environmental group on the outside of the world. You have a project, you have a business model, and it just so happens that the side of that does help the environment, so a little bit it does. So I think you've done your system engineering. It always is going to pay off financially.
Mhm.
It's a business thing, so it must work. Otherwise you wouldn't be doing it.
Right,
So
exactly.
I just, the side effect does help. You're good to run it as a business venture, not to say the environment. The side part is you help the environment. If it works, it'll work.
Well, but we always do consider that. But you know, we're not going to venture into a project that, number one, doesn't make sense or has the potential to have damning effects on things. That's what I mean. We work for big gas operators. We work for big gas companies, but we try to keep them on the up and up. We're the environmental stewards. We're the sheriffs in town. And same with when we work with. That's why we work with the PUC as well. You know, we make sure that the stream crossings are in place, or that they have inspectors all the time. So, yeah, it is a business. It definitely, you've got to make money. But on the other side of it, you know, we're environmental engineers. I think sometimes people forget that part. Is that we're consultants, but we like to hunt, we like to fish, and we like to do things outside as well.
Your goal is not to sell to 222 East Pine Street. Your goal is to sell to a distribution system. Is that right?
Depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing.
Well, I mean, I couldn't say, okay, well, I want you to run a line to my house.
Mhm.
You don't do that.
No,
not as
no,
much.
no.
Yeah.
What Tim was talking about before, the community solar program, that would give you access that way.
I mean, it's just cost prohibitive to do that, to run individual
You
lines
have
to each
do it,
house.
and I like the idea of larger areas
cheaper.
Makes more sense, and makes much more sense than someone putting solar panels on the roof.
Right.
It's so much better. So I like that idea. And of course, if everybody says, okay, by 2040, our demand for power in this country is 6 or 8% per year increasing. Our demand, like for energy, there's no way you can keep up with that. But you've got a business model that will work and it helps.
Yeah, I would just say, going to Penn State from undergrad and graduate schooling, coming out of school, I went straight into the solar industry because I felt extremely passionate about that industry. I can go to work every day and make a tangible impact to minimize environmental impacts, emissions, impact climate change. Those things are all extremely important to me. I know it's very important to younger and older people. But it is a business case, absolutely. If it didn't work financially, these projects wouldn't get built. But for me personally, I got into the industry because it's something I love, and I think I can have the biggest impact through my job doing this. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Earlier you presented the farm rental income at a certain number that would help to pay real estate taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's falling along the wayside. The real estate taxes in this area are growing faster than the actual farmers are willing to pay for renting land. Though I've heard of farmers coming up out of Lancaster County up here to farm and somewhat taking away from the local farmers, providing more income. But I've been waiting for the comprehensive design for farmland property for the farmers to decide what they can do in the future with their land. If you want to subdivide it, how many lots you can put on that parcel of land. And by doing so, now we increase also traffic flow and other problems with land development. Because now you have to put sewage facilities on there, and you got traffic, roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I can see where the solar would help a farmer decide what he wants to do with his land for the next generation, his generation.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the farmers that are not able to make enough profit to live on today with the cost of equipment, taxes, etc., that this project, I can see if you're going out to lease a parcel of land 20, 30 years down the road, that takes care of a family for quite a few years versus getting into development costs, and that type of thing. So what do you want to see, the solar panels, or do you want to see traffic increase with new roads, new other problems? So I've been kind of waiting to see how this comprehensive design that is overdue, and to see if this venture could be something I might be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common thing that we hear from our landowner partners is that, you know, we're a generation where, you know, our sons, daughters, or grandkids don't want to farm the parcel anymore, or aren't going to get into it, but this preserves that land. Additionally, as Tim was talking about, for reclaimed, it's effectively converting a relatively non-usable use to a usable use and a cash flow positive parcel for that landowner, or for the municipality, depending on, you know, we're working on some projects where municipalities are converting their coal land and brownfield landfills. So Yeah, I mean, I think to what Tim was saying a little bit ago, I love this space because when I started, I had a project with a Fortune 100 company where the economics didn't make sense. They were just doing it because they could say they went green. And it's been super interesting from 2009 till now to see that it's just for the most part, I can sit with the CFO and it makes sense financially for them, as well as doing well for the local community and doing well for the environment. So from my perspective, that's why we're firing on all cylinders running at this.
Not gonna close the meeting down, but getting on the 9:30, so. Any final? Any final thoughts?
Going to bed.
Yes? Thank you, gentlemen.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
So I do have one